Let's bring in Professor Simon Jackman, political scientist at the University of Sydney. Professor Jackman, thanks for your time as always. The Prime Minister will be the first world leader to meet face-to-face with President Biden since that visit to Tel Aviv last week. And this probably, Simon, is the last window for a visit of this sort before the US really kicks into that presidential election cycle.
Yeah, the window is starting to get tight on that, Kieran. The other thing I think to note about the visit is it'll be a tale of two visits at either end of Pennsylvania Avenue. It'll be very much to the template of a state visit down at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue at the White House. A little more delicate up the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, up at Congress, where I think, despite there not being a Speaker of the House, it's incredibly important, as is the case with any prime ministerial visit to Washington, that Prime Minister Albanese has talks with senior leaders on both sides of the aisle, which he will. There won't be any address to a joint sitting of Congress. That's just not feasible in the absence of a speaker. So that element of the pomp and circumstance will not be happening. But in addition to the members of the administration you're showing on screen right now, it's talks with in particular, the co-chairs of the Friends of Australia caucus, a bipartisan group, a large bipartisan group in the US Congress. That'll be an incredibly important agenda item because its next stop is the US Congress in terms of getting some real traction on some of the legalities that need to be cleared around tech transfer in particular, and the National Defence Authorization Act, a big piece of legislation in which there is this offset to increase US nuclear submarine production, a critical hurdle that US lawmakers put in place before some of the other elements in the AUKUS program can get rolling. So it's his business up the other end of Congress, the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, not having a speaker notwithstanding, very important part of this visit, Kieran.
The acting Prime Minister, Richard Marles, says he's confident that those export controls that you alluded to will be removed, that Congress will get it done. But I just wonder, Simon Jackman, what's the view in Washington, both in the White House and in Congress, toward Australia normalising relations with China? Because this visit comes a fortnight out from the Prime Minister's visit to Beijing, the first one by a PM in more than 7 years.
Yeah, the timing was auspicious, wasn't it? I think that might have been the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs looking to get in there and cast a little bit of a shadow or a little bit of a counter-narrative around Albanese's visit to Washington. Look, for one thing that Australia, I think, has done very well in Washington, Kieran, and that is to educate the United States about the nature of our relationship with China. And I think we can have unquestioned security credentials when it comes to our alliance relationship with the United States. And indeed, the United States is the single largest source of foreign investment into Australia. And on the outbound, the United States is perhaps I think it is the single largest destination of capital leaving Australia. I think one thing over the last 5, 10, 15 years is educating the Americans in the know and influential Americans in Washington that we can have an unquestioned security relationship with the United States based on shared democratic values. But like many other countries in the world, like the United States itself, its economic relationship with China is just too big to be ignored. That is an incredibly important part of Australia's contemporary relationship with the world, just as it is for the United States. But Australia is sufficiently an ally of substance that the United States can be confident that when it comes to China, when it comes to the United States, Australia can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think some of the things Australia's done over the last 5 years leave the United States incredibly reassured about our credentials, our commitment, our capability as an alliance partner. And I think leaves things in a good place for Australia to begin to perhaps rebalance, renormalize, rejig some of those aspects of our economic relationship with China.
Almost out of time, but just quickly, how do the optics go of a state dinner like that at the White House with the president at a time of this conflict erupting in the Middle East?
Yeah, Kieran, look, there are many ways to dial up or dial down the light entertainment part of a state dinner. The Trump Morrison state dinner was very special, an incredibly glamorous event held outdoors in the Rose Garden. I think, it won't be something like that level of glamour and glitz, if you will. There are ways to sort of hold a state dinner that are much more buttoned down and much more somber. And I think a nod to the sort of the testing times that the United States and the world is looking at right now with conflicts in Ukraine. And now that Biden determined that the US put aid on the table for Israel as well. I think there are many ways to stage a state dinner such that, yes, you'll recognise that Hollywood and Australians in Hollywood and all the rest of it, our sports stars and whatnot, are incredibly big elements of how the US imagines Australia. But you can dial up and dial down those elements appropriately, and I think this state dinner will be a little more dialed down, perhaps a slightly more sombre affair than, say, some of the other visits by Australian prime ministers and state dinners in particular in recent visits.
Professor Jackman, appreciate your insights as always. Thanks.
Thank you, Kieran.